All right. I know that we have got Professor Steinbuch waiting in the wings. This is going to be the treat of the day. Really excited to have Professor Steinbuch. Okay. While Kevin's doing that, I want to talk a minute about Robert Steinbuch. First of all, we have numerous times mentioned the FOIA Bible, which Robert has now taken over exclusively. And as we read in Mike Masterson's column a little bit ago, the 7th edition is coming out, which Robert is writing on exclusively. I'm really excited to get that. The other news in Robert's career and life is he's now running for a state representative, and really excited about that. Because I see Robert as a man of the people, a candidate of the people, somebody who's going to stand up for rights. Not only the right to know that we're here about today, but all the other rights. Robert has his background's unbelievable, Ivy League. I could go through all the list. Law review articles. He's been a professor at the Bowen School since 2005. Received various awards. One of the things that we mentioned earlier was the FOIA task force, of which Robert is a member. And the FOIA task force, I thought it was just going to be another task force that does nothing, but I've been so pleased and so surprised that the task force looks at every piece of legislation. The public is involved. I'm asking everyone who's listening today to get on that email chain during the session, because those bills are vetted by folks like Robert, who are the experts in FOIA, and to make sure there are no unintended consequences of laws that's going to affect our right to know. Got it. Are we?
Is it good?
Yes, perfect. All right, you're set, Robert. Take it away.
All right, folks. Thank you for having me, and it's wonderful that you're able to get the electronic release. Sorry, I keep the mount there, so let me just adjust the camera. Anyway, let's get right into it. First of all, thank you very much, everyone, for the kind words from Mike Masterson, from Joey, Dan Sullivan earlier. All the nice things that you all say to me is going to make my head swell. As Joey mentioned, I'm a law professor. I appear here in an individual capacity. That's particularly important now that I'm running for office, to draw that distinction, so I do so happily. I'm a trial attorney, an appellate attorney, a FOIA advocate, as Joey mentioned, the co-author of the current edition of the FOIA, what we colloquially call the FOIA Bible, the treatise of the Freedom of Information Act, and the sole author of the next edition. And to be clear, with the explicit direction of my two co-authors, they both said to me, well, we've done it long enough. One is fully retired, the other one has moved out of state, and when they brought me on to be co-author, they were both out of state already and said, we'll transition with you, and then thereafter it's yours, so handle it. And I happily do so. So that book will be coming out, incidentally, from Lexis. So it's going to be national press now, and it will be available online through Lexis, as well as, of course, hard copy. And Joey is mentioned in the book. I suspect I cite to at least one, if not more, Mike Masterson articles. I certainly cite to some laws written by Dan Sullivan, a real, true advocate for transparency. Let me just make this point more broadly. Joey made a very nice comment about me running for office and that I'm a man of the people. I like to think that's true. I'll tell you a short story in a moment about that. But before I get to that, let me mention Dan Sullivan. Dan Sullivan is a state senator. He doesn't have a polo shirt with the little emblem senator written on it. Why? Because he didn't run for office to get the fancy shirt, to get the title. He did it to do good. You might not agree with everything he does. You might. but he did it because he has the right sentiment at heart. I once worked in the IRS of all places, not doing tax law, I did ethics law, in fact. And I worked in an internal office, meaning it wasn't something that had a liaison to the public. We didn't interact with the public. And I got a phone call on my direct line, and it turns out it was a woman who had been forwarded to me. And she said, I was told you're the person to help me solve this tax problem. Well, I know already that's incorrect because I don't do tax law. I don't know tax law. I didn't know it then, and I don't know it now. But rather than saying, no, you just have the wrong number, I said, okay, well, I know I'm not the right person. Here's who I think is the right person. She gave me a little description of what she needed. Here's that person. I'm going to connect you to that person. Here's that person's number. And since you called me through the switchboard, here's my direct line. And if that person is not the right person, or that person doesn't get you to the right person, call me back. And we'll find out who is the right person. Why? Because I equally have a commitment to doing the right thing. And unfortunately, government bureaucracy doesn't operate that way. On the whole, there are notable exceptions, but on the whole, it doesn't operate that way. Government bureaucracy is like a living creature. What creature? Well, it's kind of like rats and cockroaches. Why? They like to breed, they like to eat, that means be funded, and they don't like sunshine. They don't like light. That's what the FOIA is. It's sunshine. So we have to continually shine the light on government to make them scurry, bring out those good government workers who are doing good in the first place, who welcome those phone calls, who welcome that light. Not everyone's been. But when you hear a government actor, and I've heard it many times, say, we don't need this law, this new proposed law. Why? Because we would never do that. We would never act ill-motived. I'm going to tell you a story exactly about that issue. I've been working with the legislature for at least a decade now, I believe, on a variety of bills, mind you, gotten several of them passed, including Freedom of Information Act amendments, positive amendments. Equally so, fighting to beat back amendments that seek to restrict it, that seek to undermine it, that seek to turn the law into Swiss cheese, so it's inoperable. So there was, across this country, on all Freedom of Information Acts, there's a notion developed by courts, because it's not explicitly in the statute, but it is implicitly. And it's known as the catalyst theory. So it's a fancy name, but if you know anything about chemistry, catalyst is when you drop a chemical in with two other chemicals, and it makes those two other chemicals react. And so, as you likely know, in the Freedom of Information Act, if you're successful, you can get attorney's fees. So what does it mean to be successful? Because that's all it asks for. It asks for actually not complete success, but substantial, significant. Statutes differ, but it's all the same notion. You need to have been the better of the two in terms of the litigants, in terms of how the outcome came. And if you were, you get attorney's fees. That's to incentivize attorneys to take the case and disincentivize government from putting up roadblocks to transparency. Well, I brought a case. Actually, I was the litigant and co-attorney on it with another attorney. And I brought a case. And the university system said, well, even though they got a bunch of records, which we did, they're not entitled to attorney's fees. Oh, wait, what? Why not? Well, they're not entitled to attorney's fees because they didn't get the records by winning a judgment given by the judge. Well, how did we get the records? Well, of course, they turned them over. We sued, they settled. It's funny how that works, isn't it, right? All of these bureaucrats are big talkers. They're like internet bullies, right? They make a lot of noise till they show up in court. So we sued, and they turned over documents. So they said, well, that could never be a win. Wait, So if we get all the documents we want, that's not a win? That's right, says the university. Why is that not a win? Well, because the judge didn't say you won. But if we get all the documents, that's still not a win? That's right, not a win. That was their argument. By the way, I heard them make that same claim. We would never try to do anything that abuses the FOIA. We would never try to act in a way that's inconsistent with transparency. So the courts across this country have already developed an answer to that question. It's called the catalyst theory. The courts have said, well, if the catalyst was the lawsuit for you getting the records, then you get attorney's fees. That's a win. And of course, as a matter of logic, it is as well. They said, well, there's no case in Arkansas on that. Well, there's no case in Arkansas on that because nobody had ever had the temerity to make such a ridiculous argument, right? Here's the thing. Courts don't have to give opinions if people aren't dumb enough to show up with ridiculous arguments. Until now. So, they made that argument. So Dan Sullivan got wind of this. Dan Sullivan said, we need to make a law. And Dan and I sat down and we drafted that law. Oh, the story doesn't end there. The university showed up to the legislature on your dime, by the way. Who's paying for them? On your dime to lobby against the law. So this is what happens, by the way, with bureaucrats all the time. They show up, they're paid by the government, and they show up to lobby the legislature to have less oversight. And you're paying for it the whole time. That's some setup, ain't it? So they lobby against the law. They say, well, maybe there's a good idea here, but it ain't this law. This law passed, by the way. It was such a good law that sponsored by Dan Sullivan, a Republican, and it was co-sponsored by a Democrat. Because the thing about transparency is it's not right or left. It's right or wrong. And it's just right. So we got that law put into place. So they were all concerned, the university was, well, we want to make sure that the legislative history says that it's not retroactive. Because we're still going to fight this one. This one that we have in a proceeding. We're still fighting. We're never letting go like a dog with a bone. All right, we'll put that in the legislative history, no problem. Law passes, I think unanimously, but I'm not sure. I mean, it sailed through. I don't know, a few months later, Joey and I litigated a case up in Northwest. And we asked for attorney's fees. How did we get the records? Because we sued and they settled. You mean exactly the same facts? That's right, exactly the same facts. So you got the records pursuant to the catalyst theory, right? Or as a catalyst. The lawsuit was a catalyst, so you want the attorney's fees pursuant to the catalyst theory. That's right. And we went to the judge and we said, we'd like attorney's fees. He said, you got them. And it's clear that the old law already recognized the catalyst theory. So all that litigation and all that legislation, why? Because a big state agency that can throw around its weight, that has unlimited funds to litigate because you're paying for it, decided to say that the law doesn't say what it says. So we put it on the books. And so that law serves two purposes. One is, that was a trial court, we don't have to go on appeal. I mean, we won, but the point is, they're not going to appeal that. Why? Because the law's on the books. So this saves the public all that extra litigation. And it sends a signal to every bureaucrat around the state. We're here, and we ain't going nowhere. And we're going to fight you. We're going to fight you every time you're anti-transparency. And that's what that act was, that behavior. That was anti-transparency, and we're pro-transparency. So that's a little story about how legislation comes about. Let me tell you about disclosure and discovery as well. I thought Mike did a wonderful job, Mike Masterson, talking about that. in the cases that he's handled over 50 years of history. I mean, what a wonderful journalist that we have in this state. He was both an academic and a journalist. He was a head of, I think, the nation's largest journalism program at the Ohio State University. And he was a journalist for years and years, and now he's a columnist, which, as you likely know, is a journalist who gets to give you news and opinion at the same time. And the good thing about Mike Masterson is he doesn't lose focus. When there's an issue to be followed, he will follow it and continue to follow it. That's the kind of perseverance that we need in journalists, and that's the kind of perseverance we need in the public when it comes to the use of the FOIA. I had mentioned, and Joey had mentioned, maybe Mike did too, I don't remember, that I'm running for office. Well, my primary opponent works for a government agency. He's on the board or something, I forget what the title is, a government agency called the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. I'm aware of that organization. I've never been a fan of the organization. That organization is the public version of the Chamber of Commerce. They take your tax dollars and they use it to advance private business. Not small business, big business. You think Walmart needs advancement? Walmart's great. And they do their job just fine without any public subsidy. But that's what the AEDC is. It's corporate welfare. So I said to myself, I use the FOIA. I know the FOIA. Let me make a FOIA request of the Arkansas Economic Development Commission and see what they've done in terms of giving money to a private lobbying group that is the Chamber of Commerce. Chamber of Commerce is a private lobbyist paid for by business. And they go out and they advertise for business and they do whatever they want. And they, of course, they lobby the legislature. You heard them lobby the legislature when the legislature wanted to enforce individual liberties, and the chamber, along with big business, said, no, our employees don't have individual liberties. They check those at the door even when they're not working. So I made that FOIA request. Let me tell you what I found, because this is the power of the FOIA. I got 58 pages back from the AEDC. They were very compliant, to their credit, by the way, with the FOIA. 58 pages, and I'm going to read to you just a few of them. Here's one. $5,000 check for membership to the Arkansas Economic Developers and Chamber Executives. It's a type of chamber, private lobbying, $5,000 membership. $5,000 Mid-South Basic Course Sponsorship in Presenting Sponsor. $25,000 annual membership. I'm going to show you this paper. And what does it say on top? I don't know if you can see it. Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce. $25,000 for 1 year annual membership. And there's more than one, folks. There's a lot more than one. This is where your tax dollars are going, and this is what's disclosed pursuant to the Arkansas FOIA. So the $5,000, the course sponsorship, here's what you get. You get top billing on promotional material, logo on promotional material, sponsorship given highest acknowledgement at course reception. Oh yeah, there's a fancy gala dinner, and they eat the fish dinner and the apple pie. You're paying for that. You're paying for that. How do we know? Freedom of Information Act. This is the kind of what I call government corruption and cronyism that goes on every day that you wouldn't be aware of if it wasn't for the Freedom of Information Act. Right? Let's talk about some of the laws. By the way, Joey or anybody, if you all can hear me, just tell me what my time frame is. It's, I got 10 after. When am I on until? Anybody there?
Yeah, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
We've got about 2:15 or so.
Okay, so about another 5 minutes or so, right?
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
Okay.
If you need a little extra, that's fine. If you need
That's fine. I thought I was coming near the end, so I wanted to make sure that I was gonna keep it in. So we'll be fine, don't worry. I want to talk about 3 bills, but it won't take me very long. Now, I've been working with a bunch of legislators over the last 10 years on many different laws, including Freedom of Information Act. Happens to be that the 3 that I pulled are sponsored by Dan Sullivan. He's not the only person who's pro-transparency. I want to make that clear. There are many in the legislature who are pro-transparency. These bills wouldn't pass if it wasn't for them, right? One guy doesn't pass a bill. It takes 2 chambers to pass a bill. But Dan is at the vanguard amongst a select few. So one of the laws that we did was, it's another interesting story, I'll keep it short. An attorney by the name of Ben Motal made a FOIA request. No, excuse me, he went down to City Hall with his camera and he said, let me see a police report, I want to take a picture of it. They said, well, you can't take a picture of it. You can't take a picture of it. Why not? And they said, because you got to give us $10. I said, no, I got to give you $10 pursuant to your silly little local ordinance if I want you to make a copy. But pursuant to the FOIA, I'm allowed to copy any record I want. So let me copy it. It's cheaper than $10. And he also was making a point about it because he sued over it. It cost him $175 just to file a suit. So he sues them. They said, no, you can't take a photograph. Why not? Because a photograph ain't a copy. And you're telling me that government bureaucrats are not going to try to manipulate the FOIA? Because a photograph ain't a copy. That was their legal argument. They ultimately lost that one in the Court of Appeals. And you know what the city said? City of Little Rock. We're going to take it to the Supreme Court. They couldn't let it go. What I say earlier, dog with a bone. That's how these municipalities are. Dog with a bone. So we wrote a law. Guess what? We don't need to go to the Supreme Court anymore. We resolved it. Done. That's one law. Next law was, bear with me. Oh, I think Dan, like we talked about this, foundations. You know that the university and other public entities, the universities, excuse me, and other public entities do their fundraising through a charitable foundation. You know why? So that it's not subject to the FOIA. That's why. To avoid transparency. And then they tell you, we're not subject to the FOIA. Doing government work, sometimes on government property, with government employees, taking in donations, which is government money, because those donations are designated for the universities. No, says the universities, not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. We haven't passed that bill yet. Why? Universities have a lot of tentacles. We're going to pass that bill. With my help, hopefully, in the legislature. Next one. Catalyst theory, I talked about that one. We passed that one, bipartisan, over the objections of the universities. And finally, Joey, I think you mentioned this already, the definition of meeting. We haven't passed it yet, but we've got to get some better laws out there because I think the law is clear, but the courts don't. So we've got to make it clear that when governing bodies, people who are on governing bodies get together and talk about government business, that's a meeting. I mean, sometimes it baffles the mind, but after these stories that I told you about, can't bring your camera in, can't use the catalyst theory, nothing amazes me anymore. So we're going to pass that one too. So these are the items that are on the agenda going forward. Some have been resolved. There are always more. Government always finds a way to get around transparency, and we will constantly be vigilant in watching them and enacting legislation to ensure that transparency persists. So anyway, I think that's my time. I thank you so very much for this kind invitation. If you would like more information about the FOIA, you can contact me directly at any time. I can be reached at 501-ATTY, like attorney, ATTY 804, 501-ATTY 804, or you can send me an email, rob@steinbuchforarkansas.com. My name is spelled Steinbuch for FOR, Arkansas.com. Rob@steinbuchforarkansas.com. feel free to get in touch. Joey, thank you very much for having me on. This is the second time that I participated, and we've had it twice, and I hope to continue every year that we do this.
Well, hey, let's give.
Does anyone have any questions for Robert?
I have a question for Robert.
We have, I think Mike Masterson has a question. Mike, let us get the microphone if we can.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
I'm good. Can you hear me at all? This doesn't seem to be projecting, but that's okay. Here it is. There it is. There. Okay. Robert, earlier I made the comment that I really didn't understand, and you addressed this to a degree, why people seek public office and then elected by the public to do their business with trust and honor, and then decide that they're going to keep everything from the public. Why does that happen, do you think? Is it the corrupt nature of humankind? Go ahead.
It's a great question, Mike, and I'll try to answer that, because I do have some thoughts on it, but I'll tell you in advance, I'm not sure I can entirely answer. I think some people seek office with good motives, and then bad things happen.
Yeah.
I think some people seek office with bad motives, and we've seen some of that in this state notably, right? We've seen, your papers covered those events quite clearly. And then bad things inevitably happen. And then I think perhaps maybe even the biggest category is people seek office, seeking to do good, but don't know exactly how things operate. And they try, and sometimes they fail. And they fail as a function of motive, or they fail as a function of knowledge. I'll give you an example. You know, one of the big issues in my campaign is safety and security. Little Rock area has seen such an increase in crime, it's devastating. And I'm committed to the #1 issue of safety and security for my constituents. So someone happily said to me, but wait, the police are city police. You're running for state office. What are you going to do? And I've heard elected officials make this claim as well, because they don't understand how it operates. The fact is, cities exist at the pleasure of the state, and state law determines whether or not we can put state police in cities. And we can. All we have to do is pass a law. So, we need people who have the fortitude to stick it out, to do right, even when there's pressure not to, when there's donors pressuring them to do otherwise, when the municipal league comes with bills drafted in hand telling them, this is good for your local folks, and it ain't good. It may be good for the local bureaucrats, but it ain't good for the constituents. They need to understand what's really going on. They need to have the fortitude to push back when the municipal league that writes big checks to candidates says, we want you to do this. I'm not owned by anybody. People can write me a check or not write me a check. It's not going to make a difference. They should write me a check if they want someone who's high-minded and not able to be bought in office. If they think they can buy me, don't write me a check. Same thing for individual donors.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt. We've got another question for you.
Okay. Yeah, just to sum up. So the point is, there are a lot of factors going on, and that's why we have to watch our elected officials the same way we watch our bureaucrats. Ultimately, the people are responsible for government, and the FOIA is a powerful tool to enforce that. The other one is elections. Go ahead, Joe.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for that response. Colonel Parsons, do you have a question on this subject? Because I've got something that I want to do here, and I want to bring you into this discussion. Before you ask your question, and before I ask Colonel Parsons a question, I want to go to Senator Brian King is come in. What'd you say?
Former.
Well, former, I call you senator. And he is running for state senate. We've talked about that Robert Steinbuch is a man of the people. I have seen that in action with Senator, who I still refer to as Senator King. And I'm going to ask you a question in a minute, Jim Parsons. But before we go to that, I would like to ask to get Senator King's comment on, Mike, your question was, why do good people get into office and then they betray our trust? And,
No, that's it.
and
Yeah.
can you,
Yeah.
Senator King, can you speak to that?
Yeah, and
Well,
I'm
here-
Brian King.
I want to get you a mic here.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm Brian King, and, is it on?
It's kind of finicky.
Okay. Okay. I probably have a loud enough
Here,
voice.
can you come up?
Yeah.
We've got YouTube and Facebook, so they're going out all over the state, so we'd like to hear you.
So I am Brian King. I reside in Carroll County, but I was elected to the legislature in 2006 to 2012 as a state representative, which included all of Carroll and the western part of Boone County. So I did represent that. And then I was elected in the Senate in 2012 to 18, which did not include Boone County. But so my first, Mike, the first instance I had with FOIA was when I was running for office in 2006. I had worked with the county extension agents on a Carroll County leadership program. Of course, they're funded by federal funds. We had worked on just a leadership program. I was running for office, and we dealt with each other implementing a leadership program. So then a newspaper out of Eureka Springs FOI'd all our emails together trying to see if there was any type of using the program to campaign in which they had. And the first time I heard it, it was like, you just got FOI'd. And I was like, oh my gosh, what, I knew about it, and it was like, oh my gosh, this thing came over. I was like, well, I don't know. Well, they didn't find anything. We kept everything professional. And so that was my first instance. When I got in the legislature, I went from 2006 to 2012. The staff people told me I was the most FOI'd legislator down there during that time. And then I would, because we had, in Carroll County, you have the river that divides the county, and you have different types of people, let's say, on different things. And they would FOI me a lot in my communications with government officials. And obviously they didn't find anything nefarious or anything like that. And it was just good governance. And I learned through that process, even though I didn't like it. And, Mike, some of it is like, it's for good reason. It's like somebody, like a newspaper saying, going off the record and trying to tell you something or talk about something. Sometimes you have personal issues that deal with family members or school or things like that. That's very difficult for somebody to explain. So there is a lot of things that people hide things. We've had numerous people in the legislature, my colleagues, former colleagues, that have went to federal prison now. So there are a lot of different things that can happen out of this. So I think a lot of people get in good, and then in 17 session, we had Senate Bill 373, which would have closed FOI for colleges. And the intent of that was to hide things. Let's just say that. So it's one of those things is you want to be able to operate as somebody that deals on personal matters and be able to have confidentiality. And sometimes as you can explain things to somebody and you can talk about it without making accusations, where if it's an email or something out, it seems like an accusation. And somebody can plead their case from their side. So there's a lot of different reasons, and they're also nefarious, but I think that FOI, I have learned, as I went through the legislature, I think the last time I was major FOI was, if you remember, Democrat Treasurer Martha Schaffner was up on bribery charges. Literally got the money in the pie box thing. And so the lawyer for her, Chuck Banks, who I know and had, have a real good relationship with. I was audit chairman at the time, and so there was things as audit chairman we were looking into with that situation. And so he, as a good attorney does, looked for all the information in FOI. And I would tell you this, as staff people came up and said, I never deleted one email when I was in the legislature. And so they said, oh my gosh, you've got all these emails, even from my House days. I did not delete an email. And that's hard too, because sometimes an email you might say something that can be construed differently. You'd have to explain yourself. But I just really believe that, my first instance with FOI was so valuable to me because, and I didn't like it. I mean, sometimes when you feel like you get FOI'd, you know, you feel like somebody's questioning your integrity and stuff. By the time I got done in the legislature and saw what happened with the corruption, with what saw with Ecclesia College over there and the taxpayer money that they still will not today produce the records for, you know what, I learned that, you know what, you need to operate in that world because it can keep you better. When you're sitting there like Ecclesia College trying to hide the records, I mean, you know, that's not good. So, you know, there are good reasons why somebody will, as I said, the personal instances, sometimes the opportunity for someone to be able to talk openly and honestly with you, those can be good things. So it's a mixed bag, but the overall thing is the direction should go is that FOI and our transparency in government is critical. So thanks, Dr. Steinbuch.
Thank you. Yes, well, I appreciate all positive words about the FOIA, and it takes a team to protect the FOIA, and that's legislators, it's private individuals who use the FOIA, it's judges, it's courts, perhaps that's the same thing. Joey and I, and Chip, his partner, got that great ruling up there where you are now, basically, up there in Northwest. I forget which court it was, but maybe the court in which you guys are physically sitting, that jurisdiction.
Yeah, Washington County.
Washington County, right? And that opinion, as I mentioned on the catalyst theory, is not necessary going forward because Dan Sullivan's bill took care of that, but it was useful for that case, and it's a reflection of a judge who believes in the FOIA and understands its purpose, and that's critical. I will vote for judges based on how well they interpret the FOIA. To be clear, not whether they rule in my favor, whether they get it right, whether they understand that the purpose of the FOIA is to shine light on government, and it should be read in that fashion. How do I know it should be read in that fashion? It's literally written in the law itself. So it's not my instruction, it's the law's instructions.
All right, thank you for that. I want to kind of segue into something that we've been talking about. Of course, Robert's talked about the bureaucrats show up in Little Rock, the Municipal League, the Associated County Governments. Anytime there's a FOIA bill, you can bet our right to know is in trouble. But on the other side of that coin is people need to show up in Little Rock to testify, to be part of the task force. And I want to, Colonel Parsons, I want to talk to you on this issue. At one point, you and I showed up in Little Rock, and we waited all day long to testify on a bill that we thought would gut FOIA. And I want Colonel Parsons to tell his story about what happened on that day. Can you do that for us?
Well, we had signed up first in the morning. We got there early, and we were first on the roster to speak, and we were there till 5:30. And finally, they called on Attorney McCutcheon, and they let him speak for quite a while. And I asked him in the car going home, how come they let you talk, and how come Bob Ballinger had me to sit down? Why is that? He said, well, because I'm an attorney and you're not. But anyway, there at 5:30, I got up to speak to get my 3 minutes, I hope, and Bob Ballinger said, no, you can't speak. And of course, I was going to speak about FOI, and he didn't want to hear it because he had that bill, which was anti-FOI, and so that was quite a thing. Do I have the mic now to ask a question?
You sure did.
Professor Steinbuch, in all of your experience and your writings, what about the word entwined? Can you give us an example of when maybe the word entwined was successful, or what is meant by that? We're kind of foggy on that situation. What is that?
I think what you're referring to is when a private entity serves a governmental function, and that is the private is intertwined with the public. They receive public funds, that they are subject to the FOIA. I think that's what you're getting at. And of course, the classic case that exists is, I don't remember the name of the case, Joey may remember the name of the case, is when a city, I think Fayetteville, I think up there again in Washington County area, hired an attorney as a city attorney, but instead of hiring someone as an employee, they hired a law firm on an ad hoc basis.
Is that the Edmark case? Edmark?
That's right, thank you. That's right, Edmark. And they hired a law firm to do the work for them, and that happens. They decide it's more economical. I'm not sure it generally is, but you know, that's up to them. And so they got government funds because they were paid with government dollars. They were doing a government function because being a city attorney is a government function. And so that was the intertwining that we're talking about. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, those records relating to that work, not other work, are subject to the Freedom of Information Act, as if this law firm, in this regard, was the city attorney as if they were employees of the city. So they can't, in other words, the city can't shield public records by outsourcing a government function that's paid for with government dollars. And, you know, every case is a little bit different. Every fact pattern is a little bit different, and the court has to determine whether it's a government function or not. For example, the government doesn't typically make furniture, although they do in prison, right? But typically government doesn't make furniture. So if government buys furniture, they get a lot of furniture from prison, right? I mean, that's actually a source for government furniture for offices, etc. But they also buy furniture. So if they go to Office Depot and buy office chairs, Office Depot is now a recipient of government funds. Are they performing government function? No. They just sell office furniture and office supplies, etc. So Office Depot is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. The government office that procured the chairs still is, but Office Depot is not. So that's that distinction. Those are kind of the black and white distinctions, and then the gray sometimes gets a little more difficult to discern. But what I always recommend to folks is, when in doubt, go for transparency. I will tell you, by the way, before I turn it back over, so there was a Supreme Court case recently that said if you are making a request of a private entity that is performing a government function and paid for with government dollars, you have to run that request through the government entity that is paying that private entity. I'm not sure that makes most sense, but it's also not particularly prohibited. So what I recommend to everybody is, if you're ever making a request of, say, like the Edmark case, the private entity, you send the same request to both the private entity and the public entity. You address it to both in one letter, not separate letters. I mean, you separate copies, but one letter. Dear public entity and private entity, and you send the same letter to the public entity and to the private entity. I always recommend that people make FOIA requests using email. If they have email addresses, it's a good way to track things. And I recommend that you write in that email, please send me all responsive records to this email address in an electronic format. Then you don't have to pay for any copying costs. Remember, they can't charge you for labor. They can only charge you the actual expense of copying. There is no expense for scanning. There's expense for copying because there's the cost of paper, the cost of the toner. There is no cost to run a piece of paper that you already have through a scanner. If they try, as some public entities have tried to do, even just recently as last month, say, well, we had to print it out before we scanned it because we had to redact it by hand, and we're going to charge you for that printing, they wrong. Don't pay it, and we'll sue, because they can't charge you for that. That's a cost of redaction. That's on them. Cost of production is on you. Redaction's on them, production's on you.
All right. Now you see why he is the professor and he is the expert in FOIA. I mean, wow. Anybody have any other questions for Professor Steinbuch? think Bill Ray wants to know what's in your drink.
It's coffee and creamer, and I ain't telling what else.
All right. Okay, we'll hold you to that then. So right now, I would want to make a couple of comments. Colonel Parsons, again, he's one of my heroes because he's 88 years old and he's always fighting the freedom battles. He's fighting for transparency. You mentioned Ecclesia College. I think Senator King may have. You know, out of this Ecclesia College, where all this money was being funneled into the college, there were several federal indictments where people, one former state senator, I think, is going to be spending about 20 years in the federal prison, which is just unfortunate. But and others were caught up in that funneling of money where they were getting this money. But Colonel Parsons and myself, we filed a records request in that case, and we fought, it seems like, forever to get records and went through this hoop and that hoop. But on the other side was the Story Law Firm, of which Bob Ballinger is a part. And you've heard Colonel Parsons' experience with being cut off, spent the whole day in Little Rock and then gets cut off. There is what I would consider a monstrous state Senate battle right here in Harrison. I don't know, but it's two of the participants are Senator King and Senator Ballinger. And so the folks in this room and on the YouTube channels and Facebook channels, you need to ask questions, and you need to delve deep into what's your position going to be on the Freedom of Information Act, because to me, it's on the plate. And that's what your record is, too. Huh? That's what your record is on it, too. Yep, and that's right. And they both have proven records. Ask what their records is. You know, I think that's important. But I want to, thank Jim Parsons for the Ecclesia trying to bring information to the public by filing that lawsuit and that FOIA request. Senator King?
When Jim stepped off the Ecclesia lawsuit, I stepped in his place as the lead plaintiff to find out what happened to the taxpayer. And Brian King stepped in, and it was at Matt Bishop, who's an excellent trial lawyer and lawyer out of Fayetteville, stepped in for us when we got out of that case. So now we're going to move. We're going to change subjects slightly. Bill Ray, how do I turn on those lights? I was over there fumbling around for them. Robert, we appreciate you, and we'll be in touch soon. Great job.
Thank you so much for having me. Talk to you all soon.
Okay.